Welcome back to the Taikin Ramen channel. Today we're going to be making homemade noodles from scratch. You guys, these things are a complete game changer. Taste amazing, look even better. I can promise you that you'll make noodles that look like this. Unfortunately, I can't promise it'll be quick.
Let's go, in and out, 20 minutes adventure.
We're going to start by making some dough. Get a cookie sheet or a rimmed baking sheet and cover it with aluminum foil, and then spread a thin layer of baking soda over the top. Head over to the oven and evacuate any cats from the area, even extremely cute ones. And then we're going to preheat the oven to 250 degrees Fahrenheit. Once the oven's hot, we're going to put our baking soda in and leave it for 1 hour. While this baking soda is cooking in the oven, it's going to develop a very high alkali, which is going to be critical for our noodles. After an hour, we're ready to start making our dough. What you'll need is a scale that's accurate down to a gram, vitamin B2, also known as riboflavin, standard table salt, and our cooked baking soda. This is now high alkali salt. Finally, a vessel to mix everything up in. We'll start by zeroing out our scale. I'm going to be making about 15 servings of ramen here. For that, I only use 1 pill of vitamin B2, which is about 4.999
repeating, of course,
grams, 12 grams of table salt, and on top of that, another 12 grams of high alkali salt. Head over to the sink. Into all of this, we're going to add 432 grams of water. Now we're going to get some chopsticks and mix this up until the riboflavin is dissolved and this has turned completely yellow. This is what's going to give our noodles their bright yellow color. For the dry mix, we're measuring out 1,200 grams of bread flour, and on top of that, 12 grams of vital wheat gluten. I'll put the recipe up on the screen. If you're trying to make these noodles at home, I'd recommend taking a picture or pausing the video for a screenshot now. Alright, it's time to begin drizzling our saltwater solution into our dry mix. You want to do this slowly. If you poured all of the saltwater solution in at once, you would have some parts of the dough that were overhydrated and others that were underhydrated. We want to have even hydration throughout the dough. Once the dough is too cumbersome for your chopsticks, go ahead and glove up, and we'll continue kneading by hand. I don't want to overwork the dough. I'm just trying to make sure that there's no wet clumps, and if there's any dry bits, incorporating those with the more hydrated parts of the dough. We're going to move everything into a 1-gallon Ziploc bag. And then work the air out. We're going to seal this bag up, and the dough needs to rest for 30 minutes before we can start rolling it out. And this brings us to part 2. What you're going to need in your work surface: get your scale back, obviously you need your dough, and I'm using a KitchenAid stand mixer with the dough rolling attachment. Later on we'll also need the dough cutting attachment, and finally I'm using a Tupperware. You just need some kind of vessel to hold your completed dough sheets until you're ready to cut them into noodles. I found that a good portion of noodles for myself and my guests is 120 grams. So I'll use my scale to measure out 120 grams of dough. You can adjust this quantity to your liking. Dump the dough out on your work surface and begin working it into a flat disc. We don't want this to be any more than a couple centimeters thick. I'll set my dough rolling attachment to its widest setting and then pass my dough through. It's going to look ugly the first time around. What I'm going to do is fold it in half, and then I'm going to run it through the mixer again on the same width, with the fold side going in first. I'm going to continue folding it, putting the fold side in first and passing it through the stand mixer's widest setting just until the dough starts to come together, looking uniform without holes or cracks in it. Now I'm going to begin the process of flattening, where rather than folding it, I'm going to continue running it through the mixer, setting the mixer to thinner and thinner settings until I get to the thinnest setting on the stand mixer. You can see this revealed a lot of imperfections, some holes have developed, and it's certainly not the shape we want our noodles to be. So we're going to laminate it. Fold your sheet into thirds over itself, and then set your stand mixer back to a wide setting, and pass the dough through thinner and thinner until you get to the thinnest setting. We're going to relaminate and repeat this process until we have a uniform dough without streaks, without cracks, and in the nice rectangular shape that we'll want to cut our noodles out of later.
How wonderful, gorgeous, really. That makes me want to be.
We'll set this in our container for later and repeat this process with the remaining dough. With the quantities I used today, I came out with 13 sheets. You may have more or less depending on the day. And now on to my favorite part, cutting these noodles. Remove the dough rolling attachment and install your dough cutting attachment. Pour yourself out some dusting flour and grab a sheet of dough. We'll pass it through the dough cutting attachment, and we're going to store these noodles 2 separate ways because we're presenting them 2 separate ways. The first variety of noodle is going to be a nice straight noodle, so don't let these things fall into a clump on the counter. Give them a nice dusting of flour, and then I like to twist and fold. If we don't twist and fold, there's a good chance that they could all become one giant clump in the Tupperware. I'm going to repeat this until the bottom of the Tupperware is full. That's going to give me about 8 noodle nests. Before I start my next layer, I'm covering the bottom layer in a piece of parchment paper, and now we'll get on to our second type of noodle. This is the more classic, crinkly ramen noodle that most of us probably grew up with. I'll let my noodles fall into a pile and then give them a dusting of flour. And yeah, now I'm just going to sort of beat them up.
Fatality.
Real talk, the whole process is about squeezing your noodle nest into a tight lump. That's going to cause a bunch of twists and kinks in the noodle, and then we'll pull them apart into a loose nest for storage. Once you're out of dough, cover your noodles up and move them over to the freezer for safekeeping. Here's our 2 noodles. You can see the same ingredients in a pretty drastically different product, and you'll really see that outcome after we cook and fold these noodles. We'll boil these noodles for 1 minute, and then use some long chopsticks to create a sort of whirlpool so that these noodles are floating and you'll be able to grab them. Then you're going to turn the strainer on its side and grab as many of these noodles as possible. We'll add our soup to a bowl. And now we're going to add our folded noodles into the bowl. Now you can see I didn't get all the noodles here, and that's okay. I had to go back about 3 times. Just get back into the strainer, try to grab some more noodles around the chopsticks, and as you're putting these noodles in the bowl, try to keep the crease along the same line. So with messy noodles like this, it is going to be a bit of a challenge to have a clean looking fold. That's sort of the magic of them though. They're fun, they're not meant to take themselves too seriously, and they still taste just as good as fancy noodles. Alright, for our next noodle, we're actually going to boil water in a high-walled skillet. We're going to lay our straight noodles in very gingerly and leave them here on a low boil for 2 minutes. At the end of the boil, we're going to move our chopsticks in and grab them at the midpoint, and then slowly raise them up, trying to keep these noodles as smooth and straight as possible. We'll add some soup to the bowl. now we'll tenderly drop our noodle fold in. You'll probably need to use a second pair of chopsticks to encourage the noodles into the bowl. And my oh my, these have to be the most gorgeous noodles I have ever made. Spruce them up with a bit of fresh spring onion, and admire your creation. So hopefully you're still with me. Making noodles is a lot of work, but I promise you there is no feeling like digging into homemade noodles, and your guests are gonna go absolutely bananas for these things. They do taste even better than they look. Thanks so much for joining me. Hopefully you learned something today. It was a pleasure having you. Please consider subscribing.